When you go out to Portland and you see what's happening in Portland, this is like nobody's ever seen anything like it. They just burned the place down.
President Trump orders 200 members of the Oregon National Guard to Portland to protect federal property like the ICE building south of downtown that the president believes is under attack. City leaders sounding out off.
Well, it's obviously a lie. He has people in his cabinet who are lying to him.
Plus, highlights from my conversation with NBC's Pentagon correspondent on how this deployment compares to what we've seen in other U.S. cities.
It feels like it's going to be pretty similar to what we saw in Los Angeles.
And we take a look at how we got here, when and how Portland rose onto the president's radar earlier this month. It's our big story tonight. Well, we begin with a live look at the ICE office in South Portland right now, where nightly protests have continued for several months. Though the temperature has certainly been turned up over the past few days following President Trump's move this weekend to send in the National Guard, something he says is needed because that facility is, quote, under attack. Our crew there now tells us there's around 40 people peacefully gathered outside the building. The state of Oregon and the city of Portland filed a federal lawsuit against the Trump administration, arguing the president's action violates multiple federal and constitutional protections. Let's start with that lawsuit and what state and city leaders had to say about this federal intervention today. Kyle Aboshi joins me outside of the federal courthouse downtown. Kyle, bring us up to speed.
Right, as for that Oregon lawsuit, it has been assigned to a federal judge. An emergency hearing on that temporary restraining order will likely occur in the next few days. Meanwhile, the Oregon National Guard confirms that troops are being processed and could be available for service by later on this week. Oregon's Attorney General Dan Rayfield filed an emergency motion in federal court seeking a temporary restraining order to block President Trump's deployment of National Guard troops to protect the federal immigration building in Portland. The motion argues adding federal troops will make the situation worse and that local law enforcement has things under control, something Portland Police Chief Bob Day and Governor Kotek agreed with this afternoon.
I'm confident that the resources of the Portland Police Bureau can manage incidents and actions that are occurring down there in South Waterfront. I don't see the need for the National Guard at this time. I really believe that we've got a handle on it.
As I have told the president, this situation is not an insurrection, does not require military intervention. This is a local law enforcement issue, and it is being handled.
Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth sent a memo to Governor Kotek Sunday ordering 200 members of the Oregon National Guard into federal service for 60 days. Those troops are under federal control. It's worth noting that Kotek is the commander-in-chief of the Oregon National Guard, but this deployment was called for by the president under Title 10 of the U.S. Code, which puts the troops under the command of the feds, not the governor. It's that Title 10 designation that the state's lawsuit is based on, arguing that authority is only given to the president under certain circumstances that include invasion, rebellion, or when federal laws cannot otherwise be executed, which AG Rayfield says do not apply here in Oregon.
So Kyle, what happens next with all of this?
Well, really the focus will be on that emergency hearing on the temporary restraining order that will likely occur later on this week. That could put the brakes on all of this, so we'll have to wait and see what occurs in federal court. As for the governor, here's what are her tactics going forward.
Next steps are doing everything we can to delay, pause, redirect, have a different outcome. I'm dissatisfied that there has been no real conversation with the Trump administration. Their desire to call up Oregon National Guard members based on faulty information is highly problematic. And I just want to remind folks that this is tough for the members of the Oregon National Guard. They are our neighbors and friends. They are citizen soldiers who have day jobs. We don't have a clear mission. We don't have a clear timeline. That is very disruptive for the Oregon National Guard members and their families who are tied up in this.
Kyle Aboshi outside the federal courthouse for us tonight. Kyle, thank you. And we heard more about that possible disruption to Oregon National Guard members today from more than a dozen local mayors. They gathered to stand behind Portland Mayor Keith Wilson this afternoon to collectively oppose attempts to, quote, federally militarize the Portland metro area. Catherine Cook was there. She joins us now with some highlights. Catherine.
Blair mayors came out from Lake Oswego, Wood Village, Beaverton, Milwaukee, even Eugene to send a clear message. This isn't just a Portland issue. It's something leaders across the metro are standing against. Each mayor shared their concerns. Many of them also noted their own personal experiences as servicemen and women. They underlined the critical role the National Guard plays in our country and communities, but said this isn't it. Mayor Joe Buck from Lake Oswego said using National Guard troops as props to feign safety is not safe for anyone. Mayor Sean O'Neill of Wilsonville added Oregonians know the Guard as their neighbors and that the Guard still deserve our honor, not blame for the position the president is putting them in. Portland Mayor Keith Wilson appreciated the united front. Same goes for many living in the suburbs whose mayors stood up today.
The mayors in this room do not measure ourselves by who is the most loud or inflammatory. We measure ourselves by our ability to make friends and to build bridges. We measure ourselves by the love of our communities and our commitment to service.
Personally, I'm grateful for that united front because it also reinforces what our governor has said about resisting the concept that Portland is war-ravaged and we need federal troops.
Now, all of the mayors urged people to behave peacefully, whether it be during protests or otherwise, noting again that Guard members are neighbors and friends. Blair.
Okay, Catherine Cook, thank you.
In this moment, it's important to use our voices however we have them and not accept the rise of this authoritarianism.
Well, strong words from Portland City Councilor and Army veteran Mitch Green today. He represents District 4, which includes downtown and the ICE building. He posted this video to social media of himself in uniform calling on military service members to speak out against the president's plans. I caught up with him just a few hours ago.
My message is to veterans and service members. If you're a vet, use your voice and stand up and call this out as an unlawful and inappropriate use of military resources. But if you're also a service member, recognize that you do not have to follow an unlawful order. There's no insurrection happening, and you're not supposed to use military resources to do policing on domestic soil, Posse Comitatus Act. And so this is something you're taught in basic training. This is something every soldier knows, and my message is for them to remember their oath of service.
Now, I asked him what he thinks about the outcome, or what he thinks the outcome will be, rather, in regards to the lawsuit, hoping to stop the Trump administration from deploying troops to Portland. Listen. Do you think that this could really be stopped?
I think so. I mean, I think we all have our parts to play. I'm really grateful to have a city attorney, a mayor, a governor, attorney general, state attorney general who sprung into action and filed a lawsuit. The part that I play is I wear a very specific use a very specific voice as a veteran, and I wanted to communicate in that regard as a leader.
Of course, so many questions remain about what to expect from this federal intervention that the state argues is federal overreach. Well, this afternoon, I caught up with NBC News senior correspondent Courtney Kuby, who covers the Pentagon, on what she's hearing about this across the country in D.C. When people in Portland hear the president is deploying the National Guard, it's sure to cause some unrest. What from your reporting should Portlanders expect?
It seems as if much of it will be focused on ICE facilities there in Portland. But the big question is what President Trump put on Truth Social over the weekend when he said that he was authorizing full force as part of this mission. At this point, officials here are not saying anything about exactly what that means and whether this could look different than other times that the National Guard has been mobilized and deployed in recent months as part of this protecting federal personnel and property, Blair.
Right, I'm curious, how has this compared to what you've seen in other cities where the president has deployed the National Guard?
So it feels like it's going to be pretty similar to what we saw in Los Angeles.
Didn't a federal judge already rule that Trump's use of the National Guard in LA was illegal?
Well, remember, that went back and forth several times. And then we've seen what's happened here in Washington, D.C., where the National Guard have also been deployed. And in this case, while they're supposed to be here to help with law enforcement and help with reducing crime, we've seen them do things like cleaning up monuments. Just this past weekend, we saw them scrubbing some of the national monuments here in Washington, D.C. But the question is, we've already heard from the governor of Oregon saying that they don't need the National Guard deployment there. And we've already seen, frankly, the majority of the information that we got over the weekend about this came from that lawsuit filed by the state of Oregon against the Department of Defense, where I'm standing, the Department of Homeland Security, and the president about this deployment. So the big question now is, will they be able to stop this deployment? At this point, everyone here, officials talking to us here at the Pentagon, believe that the National Guard will be deployed.
So I'm curious, should we expect the National Guard troops to be engaging with protesters? I know Trump has said they're going to be focused on protecting those buildings, but what do you think we should expect?
So if in fact there's protesters that are at federal facilities, we should expect to see National Guard there protecting the facilities and protecting any personnel. But they're not supposed to engage in direct law enforcement unless the rules of engagement state otherwise. Now, generally, rules of engagement, that's exactly what they're allowed to do. They're sort of their left and right limits. Those tend to be classified or at least sensitive, and we don't always know what they are. Again, I would look to, as a model for this, I would look to what the Guard was doing in Los Angeles. In that case, they were specifically, in many cases, assigned to perimeter security around buildings. In some cases, they were protecting ICE officials or other federal officials when they were going on raids or just engaged in their normal daily activity, but they weren't actually doing things, for the most part, like arrests. Sometimes they would do a little bit of crowd control, but sort of the classic law enforcement things that functions that we think of, the National Guard were not doing that in LA. And I suspect at this point, that's the same thing that you should expect there in Portland, Blair.
Okay, Courtney, thank you for your reporting. So that's the latest from today. But let's take a step back and look at how we got here. President Trump first talked about what he believes conditions are like in Portland during a news conference earlier this month, when he was asked about where he planned to send the National Guard.
We're going to go into another place and straighten it out. And I will say this, I watched today, I didn't know that was continuing to go on, but Portland is unbelievable what's going on in Portland. The destruction of the city. Well, I'm going to look at it now because I didn't know that was still going on. This has been going on for years. So we'll be able to stop that very easily. We'll be able to stop it. But you know, that was not on my list, Portland. But when I watched television last night, this has been going on. You wouldn't be standing if you were the mayor. You would be. Can you imagine what they're doing?
Okay, that was September 5th. President Trump didn't say exactly what he was watching on TV about Portland, but Fox News did air a 5-minute segment the day before, so September 4th, all about the protests outside the ICE facility, calling it a, quote, sanctuary city run amok. Here's part of that story.
And what makes this even more frustrating for residents is that Portland police won't respond to noise complaints or even when assaults are witnessed.
President Trump then reiterated his belief that protesters in Portland are being paid.
These are paid agitators, and they're very dangerous for our country. And when we go there, if we go to Portland, we're going to wipe them out. They're going to be gone, and they're going to be gone fast. They won't even stand the fight. They will not stay there. They've ruined that city. I have people that used to live in Portland. They've left. Most of them have left. But what they've done to that place is it's like living in hell.
Okay, but then the president's comments about Portland paused for 2 weeks until September 19th, when he doubled down on events he perceived to be unfolding here.
Have you seen Portland at all? Have you taken a look at what's happening in Portland? It's, I mean, this has been going on for years. It's just people out of control. They're crazy. We're going to stop that very soon.
And that brings us to last week, inside the Oval Office, where Vice President J.D. Vance used Oregon as an example of the alleged danger posed by protesters.
So I believe it was in Oregon where you had a federal building where there were men in black ski masks who were committing acts of violence, who were shutting down a government building. To the president's point, they don't come from nowhere. These are paid people. This is organized. They're committing acts of political terrorism on American soil. And it's time we had a government that looked out for the American people rather than the people who are committing violence against the American people.
The vice president was presumably talking about the ICE office when referring to a federal building, since we have not seen major demonstrations at federal buildings in the downtown core, like the courthouse, for example. Now, in that same news conference, and for the third time publicly this month, the president talked about Portland and said he wanted to, quote, whip cities like Portland into shape. Listen.
But take a look at Portland sometime. These are wild, these are crazy people. And they're trying to burn down buildings, including federal buildings. And on my list of things that I want to do before we finish up with the cities, because I think we're going to whip the cities back into shape, and we have to. We cannot let our cities, and that's a small example, but it's the most violent example. It's every night, and they've done it for years.
And then came the president's post on social media Saturday morning, directing troops to war-ravaged Portland and authorizing the use of full force, though that has not really been clarified. The alarm bells were ringing across town on Saturday, with political leaders denouncing the president's post. But Sunday morning brought conflicting news on what the president may do after he had a lengthy, on-the-record phone call with an NBC News correspondent. When he was asked about sending troops to Portland, he called the city a hotbed of insurrection and described part of a phone conversation he had with Governor Dina Kotek, saying, quote, "She was very nice, but I said, well, wait a minute. Am I watching things on television that are different from what's happening? My people tell me different. They are literally attacking and there are fires all over the place." But despite the lack of fires all over the place and your interpretation of literal attacks at the ICE building, the president pressed on later in the day Sunday with his initial plan to send in the National Guard. Here's the order from Secretary of War Pete Hegseth, authorizing 200 National Guard troops from Oregon to Portland for the next 60 days. A National Guard spokesperson tells us today they expect those troops to be ready, quote, later this week, potentially as early as Thursday. And let's be clear, there have been protests nightly at the ICE building on the South Waterfront. But most would argue they have not been as violent as the president seems to believe. Since June of this year, more than 24 people have been arrested in connection with the protests, including 2 people last night. Most of the arrests have led to misdemeanor charges. Well, coming up next on the story, after dealing with delay after delay, today, Oregon Democrats passed the controversial transportation funding package in Salem without a single Senate Republican vote. What the governor says about paying for roads and bridges in the future, and how this latest tax increase could soon end up on the ballot. That's when the story returns. It's been a long time coming, full of drama along the way. But today, Oregon lawmakers passed a multi-billion-dollar transportation package, saving hundreds of ODOT jobs and funding road maintenance, but also raising the gas tax by 6 cents, hiking fees at the DMV, and temporarily doubling the state's payroll tax for transit. Evan Watson is in Salem tonight. Evan, you talked with Governor Kotek. What was her reaction and where does this go from here?
Yeah, Governor Kotek praised the passage of the bill today from senators who moved this to her desk. It hasn't reached her desk yet. She hasn't signed it, but that is one step upcoming, and all signs, of course, point that she intends to sign this transportation package. She has already taken some action today in allowing ODOT to move forward and getting fully prepared for the winter season ahead, hiring those workers, things like that, taking those steps knowing that the funding is going to be there. But she did also recognize that this is just a temporary measure in some cases, that there are some steps in here which are good in her view, such as adding electric vehicle and hybrid vehicle fees and charges for people to help share in the road maintenance costs rather than relying so heavily on the gas tax. And here's Kotek on what more needs to be done.
But today we are celebrating the passage of a bill that took a problem at our doorstep and solved it. We also have long-term transportation needs. Let's not pretend that we've solved every issue with the bill that was finally passed today. We have to continue the conversation about our transportation system and the other things that we need to do here as a state. We have outdated roads and bridges we have to continue to modernize, and we need to continue to work with Oregonians to figure out how to get that done.
Republicans tried to change this bill numerous times, saying that transportation needs could be funded without tax increases and instead cut from other areas like public transit and environmental projects. That obviously didn't work, as Senate Democrats passed this plan with 0 votes from across the aisle. So, Evan, do Republicans have a plan moving forward?
Yeah, they do have a plan, and that is to, hopefully in their eyes, refer this out to the voters for a referendum on the tax increases in this bill. Say, put it to a vote. They said over and over again that these increases, these additional fees for transportation funding, are wildly unpopular. And they said today that they want voters to show up and make that known and have everybody come back to the drawing board. Here's Senator Daniel Bonham about what he intends to do in the coming months.
It will be incumbent upon us to make sure that this gets referred. They just said no to that process. That would have been easy, would have saved money from having to go out, gather the signatures, but we'll do it because the people deserve the right to say no to this massive tax increase.
Well, now that the immediate need from the Democrats' perspective has been handled, are you hearing anything about how transportation funding will be handled in the future to avoid something like this again?
Yeah, it's a good question. This has been a bit of a mess by really anyone's standards. They failed to pass something in the spring. They called the special session. It took a month to even get to this point. And Governor Kotek, when we talked with her today and asked her about that, seemed to indicate, hey, there should probably be a change of strategy when it comes to funding that is this important, this crucial. You heard from Democrats and Republicans say this is a basic core need of the government. Governor Kotek saying, hey, we probably shouldn't handle this all at once. We should find a different strategy so we don't reach this boiling point in a future date.
I know that our lawmakers are interested in continuing that conversation. And I think we as Oregonians should think about transportation being done in segments instead of trying to do a big bill all at once. I think we have to move beyond that. So I would anticipate the next conversation will be a continuing conversation about how do we fund some of the projects we have. And that will be up to lawmakers to start that conversation. And I will certainly support what they need to do, because also having some of these large projects that have been in the pipeline getting towards completion is also important for Oregonians.
Evan Watson in Salem tonight. Evan, thank you. Well, that is the end of our show, folks. Thanks so much for watching. Straight Talk is coming your way next. And don't forget, everyone has a story to tell. If you ever miss an episode of The Story at 6:30, we re-air it at 8:30 and 10:30 on our TV app, KGW+, which you can get for free right now on Roku, Apple TV, and Fire TV. In the meantime, have a great Monday night. I'll see you right back here tomorrow night at 6:30.